Shock. NATO drones are striking Moscow. Putin is choking with rage. Russia is looking for a pretext to attack the Baltics. The friendship between Kiev and Tokyo has forced the bunker dweller to lock himself away behind 7 locks. The little one has finally reached the Kremlin's gold vein. The flagship frigate has gone to the bottom. The dictator's top aircraft broke apart over Russia live on air. An epic moment. The SBU hasn't said everything yet. The final word is still ahead. There might not even be elections in Hungary. Orban is floundering and quarreling with Russia. The US has made its choice, the opposition is ready. Meanwhile, Russia itself has entered a state of total apocalypse. Dagestan has been washed away. Putin has unleashed a catastrophe in the Caucasus, thousands affected. This can no longer be hidden. Belarus is starting a war. Has Lukashenko started to believe in himself and finally dared? All this in our episode of Hell Point. It happened. Putin is seeing NATO drones everywhere. The bunker dweller is throwing accusations and blaming the Baltic countries for attacks on Russia. Zakhareva and Peskov no longer know which megaphones to shout into. The Kremlin's cunning plan. If it can't go on the offensive, it will start an information terror campaign. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia are too much for the dictator to handle. Putin is twisting in his office with frustration. Ukraine and Japan have shaken hands. Cutting-edge drone technologies are at stake. It seems our drones have done their job. Moscow can't do anything. Is this the approach of an epic fiasco? Let's watch. The spokesperson for the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Zakharova, made veiled threats against the Baltic countries, accusing them of allegedly providing their airspace to Ukraine for strikes on Russian territory. Zakharova noted that the Baltic countries had received the appropriate warning.
A responsible message was delivered to these countries. If the regimes of these countries have enough common sense, they will listen. If not, they will have to deal with the consequences.
According to the Russian side, the Baltic countries are allegedly allowing Ukraine to use their airspace for strikes on Russian ports in the Baltic Sea. This refers to drone attacks which, according to Russia, could have flown through the territory of these states. After the first incidents of Ukrainian drones entering the territory of the Baltic countries, the Russian information space began spreading the narrative that the Baltic skies were being provided to Ukraine. At the same time, there is no official confirmation of such accusations from the Baltic countries themselves.
I think all of this should be interpreted as attempts to put pressure on these countries, with the aim of making them stop supporting Ukraine. At the same time, it is known that there are no facts indicating that Ukraine is sending drones through the Baltic countries to attack the Baltic Sea. But for Russia, it is rather difficult to calmly accept this situation, which, in addition to undermining Russian oil exports, also delivers quite painful blows to Putin's regime and its stability. Earlier,
similar statements were previously made by Kremlin press secretary Dmitry Peskov, who also hinted at a possible response to Europe, allegedly for providing Ukraine with airspace to carry out attacks on Russia.
Moscow will take measures if EU countries really provide airspace for drone attacks on Russia. Undoubtedly, we believe that if airspace is indeed being provided for carrying out hostile terrorist activities against the Russian Federation, this obliges us to make responsible conclusions and take appropriate measures.
Against the backdrop of intensified Ukrainian strikes on Russia's military and energy infrastructure, particularly in the Baltic Sea region, Russia is ramping up its rhetoric towards NATO member countries in the area. In reality, the Russians are well aware that Ukrainian UAVs have not flown through the territory of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, but are simply taking advantage of the situation to intimidate their neighbors.
the Russians are trying to psychologically intimidate the Baltic countries so that they reduce their support for Ukraine, otherwise threatening them with direct military invasion. This completely aligns with numerous statements from global media, as well as with Trump's rhetoric that he will not help NATO countries in the event that they, unless some kind of substantial and verifiable proof is provided. In reality, all of these accusations coming from Russia are completely groundless, a fact that is widely recognized by the international community perfectly well. There is simply no evidence to support them, but Russia is once again trying to exert pressure on its neighbors, leveraging the ongoing war in Ukraine as a primary argument for its aggressive stance.
But that's not all. The Kremlin has panicked over the cooperation between Ukraine and Japan in the field of military drone technologies. Maria Zakhareva stated that such a partnership harms Russia's security interests.
By assisting the neo-Nazi regime of Zelensky, Japan is becoming increasingly involved in the conflict in Ukraine, thereby inflicting additional damage on relations with Russia, which have already seriously deteriorated due to Tokyo's actions.
The day before, the Japanese company TerraDrone Corporation signed a strategic cooperation agreement with the Ukrainian company Amazing Drones, which is engaged in the development and production of interceptor drones. TerraDrone announced its intention to increase its presence in Ukraine. In Russia, the cooperation between Japan and Ukraine was not appreciated.
Given the systematic criminal provocations by Ukraine using UAVs against civilian targets on Russian territory, we view such a step, clearly carried out not without the support of official authorities, as extremely hostile and detrimental to the interests of our country in the field of security, including the protection of the civilian population. It is obvious that such decisions will not contribute to a quicker resolution of the situation, particularly for Ukraine, but will only prolong the hostilities. We would also like to remind you that those who pose a threat to our country and our citizens militarily, as well as those who create their production capabilities in Ukraine, are legitimate military targets for the armed forces of the Russian Federation.
Such rhetoric is used by the Kremlin to legitimize strikes on Ukraine's civilian and industrial infrastructure. In reality, Moscow's irritation is caused by the fact that Ukraine's technological advantage, backed by the power of the Japanese defense industry, puts an end to the Kremlin's plans for a swift territorial takeover and forced capitulation.
A real sensation. The armed forces of Ukraine have opened the gates of true hell for the enemy. The domino effect has been set in motion. The Russian Black Sea Fleet is shrinking before our eyes. Putin's elite aviation is being burned on command. The Kremlin admits this is a real drone fever. The security service of Ukraine is forcing the enemy to cry out. A kid presses the button, striking where Russia least expects it. The air defense system was turned off, supposedly because it was pointless. When will the decisive attack happen? Don't miss the first forecasts.
The flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, the frigate Admiral Makarov, was destroyed by a Ukrainian armed forces drone. It was docked in the port of Novorossiysk. The ship was used to launch Kaliber missiles at Ukraine and was also considered the de facto flagship of the Black Sea Fleet after the sinking of the cruiser Moskva.
But now, quite clearly, Admiral Makarov's flagship will no longer be capable of firing those Kaliber cruise missiles. This represents a truly significant and historic achievement by the brave armed forces of Ukraine, and it serves as a quite serious and devastating blow to the overall missile offensive potential of the entire Russian military establishment.
The General Staff also reported the destruction of a B-12 amphibious aircraft at the Kacha airfield. The main intelligence directorate added that the B-12 Chaika amphibious aircraft was equipped with all the necessary devices for mounting and controlling combat operations with submarines. Not only expensive weaponry, but also the main source of replenishing the Russian treasury suffered from Ukrainian drones. For the second week in a row, strikes on the oil refinery in the Baltic Sea have not stopped. They can't manage to extinguish and repair Ust-Luga because drones are arriving there almost around the clock, effectively blocking the shipment of black gold.
According to a recent official report that was released today, the transportation of crude oil and various refined petroleum product shipments have finally been resumed once again at the port of Ust-Luga. Some tanker arrived, was being loaded, and so on. However, as early as late last night, reports and various stories began to emerge, suggesting that the celebration at the facility was extremely short-lived, and yet another targeted drone strike was successfully carried out against the site. In addition to this,
the ports in Ust-Luga and Primorsk, a strike was also carried out on the oil terminal at Novorossiysk-Sheskaris. As a result of the strike, 6 out of 7 oil loading stands, which are used for loading and unloading oil from tankers, were damaged. This terminal is one of the largest oil and petroleum product transshipment complexes in southern Russia and supplies fuel to the Russian military group in Ukraine.
The Security Service of Ukraine is consistently working to reduce the enemy's military, economic, and logistical potential. Such operations will continue as long as Russia does not stop its aggression against Ukraine. Each such strike undermines the enemy's ability to finance the war and supply its troops with resources.
In fact, Ukrainian strikes on Russia's largest oil refinery have halted oil exports and consequently the flow of money into the Kremlin's treasury.
Russia exports approximately 250 million tons of oil, and between 100 million and 130 million tons of oil products every single year. Well, for example, Chersonis has a maximum capacity of 75 million tons. Primorsk on the Baltic Sea, which was mentioned earlier and is often talked about, 74 million tons, and Ust-Luga, which became the target of another strike last night, about 30 million tons. If three major maritime ports are rendered completely non-functional and out of commission, located along the shores of the Baltic Sea,
Recently, the Ukrainian armed forces have been attacking Russia much more and more effectively than the Russian army does. According to official data, Russian air defense intercepted 7,440 Ukrainian UAVs of various types in March. How many reached their target is unknown. In turn, Ukrainian air defense shot down 5,935 Shaheds and other types of UAVs. This accounted for 89.8% of the targets shot down. This means that for the first time since the beginning of the war, Ukraine has seized the initiative in such strikes.
Previously, the number of drone attacks was considered a serious advantage for the Russian army. Now, the Ukrainian defense industry has managed to overcome its lag in UAV production, and the strikes have become so effective and large-scale that the Kremlin no longer knows how to stop them.
An unexpected explosion in Budapest. There might not even be an election. Orban can no longer be stopped. The death throes of Moscow in the heart of Hungary, the US has withdrawn its hand from the Prime Minister. Jay Devins' visit did not go according to plan. It happened unexpectedly. Russia, it seems, is heading for an open conflict with its former best ally. It's hard to believe. The opposition is building new contacts with Washington, and a prison cell has already been prepared for the Prime Minister. Be the first to know.
Viktor Orban continues to disrupt the elections in Hungary. The story about Ukraine allegedly blowing up the gas pipeline turned out to be ineffective, so now the focus is on declaring a state of emergency in Ukraine and postponing the vote. At the same time, even US Vice President J.D. Vance has flown in to support Orban in his pre-election agony. By the way, this is the first time in Hungary's history. He also tried to rally the remaining undecided voters to the side of the current Prime Minister by speaking at a rally in his support. Analysts believe that this could partially work.
It is exceptionally fascinating and insightful to observe the specific extent to which this unpredictable and constantly shifting electoral landscape demonstrates a significant level of support for President Trump within the broader strategic vision held by Viktor Orban as he continues his ongoing work as Prime Minister. Because, for example, there has already been a precedent when last year the US supported Javier Milei in Argentina. During the midterm parliamentary elections, he increased his standing there. However,
Orban receives much more help from Moscow. There they are ready not just to campaign, but to take action. Analysts say the result was the story involving the attempt to blow up the gas pipeline. And now there are also efforts to disrupt the elections as a whole.
The arsenal could be quite broad. The question is how much the Hungarian society trusts this. In principle, many of these things are very obviously fabricated, and it's quite clear to see. Considering that Russian political strategists are working on Orban's campaign and that the gap is widening rather than narrowing, this is also quite telling.
Orban also sees the polling data, so with each passing day, he becomes only more dangerous, experts explain. He has very little left to lose now. And in a situation where there are only a few days left in office, the Hungarian Prime Minister's team might resort to any extremes.
For Orban, these elections are a matter of life and death. During all the time he has been in power, considering that he probably found it hard to imagine he would ever be replaced, he has certainly lost his sense of caution. Many people are now talking about the very real prison terms that Orban could face for all the manipulations he carried out while in office.
First and foremost, these are related to funding from the Kremlin. Bloomberg added another point to Orban's record of ingratiating himself with Moscow just the other day. Thus, journalists became acquainted with the transcript of a conversation between Orban and Putin, in which Viktor stated that he was ready to make every effort to help Putin with the war in Ukraine. He even compared himself to the mouse from the fable who helps the lion escape from the cage. According to the transcript, this remark made Putin laugh. And this information evidently caused Orban's approval rating to drop even further.
In Hungary, prominent sociologists are already beginning to suggest that this shift essentially signifies there will not only be a mere transition of leadership, a new prime minister, but also a fundamental transformation of the entire political system that Orban has carefully built over the past 16 years.
Some analysts also believe that the increased interest of the United States in Hungary is evidence of this. Given the agreements with Washington on the purchase of liquefied gas, Vance's visit may be the United States' attempt to secure contracts regardless of whether there is a change of power in the country.
Trump, who also takes a critical stance toward the European Union, has decided to occupy the niches that were previously held by Russia. Therefore, it cannot be ruled out that if the Hungarian government changes, the mechanism for increasing the supply of alternative energy resources from the US, instead of those previously supplied from Russia, will remain in place. This is especially important against the backdrop of rising oil and gas prices now due to the conflict in the Middle East.
As for ordinary citizens, it seems they have finally understood everything. The promise made by the then-young Orban and the Fidesz party has not become a reality even after more than a decade and a half. And in some respects, the situation has even worsened.
Especially when it comes to the rule of law and human rights. As we know, judicial reform there is completely on hold. The human rights reform is also stalled there today. There are very serious complaints about it. And also today, out of all 27 European Union countries in terms of corruption, Hungary ranks at the very bottom of the list.
Now Hungarians who know about corruption firsthand have a chance to change their lives. But whether they will want to do so, we will see on April 12th.
Urgent. The Russian Federation is in the grip of a fierce disaster. Dagestan is going underwater, a powerful flood has hit Makhachkala, and on top of that, a dam has burst. Thousands of people are trapped, while the authorities pretend that everything is under control. Declaring a state of emergency no longer helps. The apocalypse of the century, Putin is to blame for this. The Kremlin has poisoned the lives of its own people. Harsh retribution for Ukraine has come from the most unexpected direction. You have to see this, don't miss it.
Dagestan, is this nature's revenge or complete indifference from the Russian authorities?
It has already completely happened by now.
For more than 10 days, Dagestan and Chechnya have been unable to get rid of the consequences of record rainfall since March 28th. And it's not that the government is doing nothing, they just have an ironclad excuse. This is the element. We are not to blame. But nevertheless, everything is under control as always. Although it looks more like another report for Putin. As of
today, the situation in Dagestan remains firmly under the control of all relevant government authorities.
Meanwhile, in the Republic, there is no electricity, no water, and no communication. And poor Russians are forced to help themselves.
Help us evacuate our people. Our Kamaz trucks, they get stuck a lot, they can't get out.
Of course, there are also the usual naive video appeals from residents to the authorities. It turns out that such abnormal precipitation is still not even a reason to declare a state of emergency. Interesting, why is that?
From the accounting level, they mentioned that there is a critical need to carefully navigate and transport goods through the extensive tea plantation flooding. They dedicated several long hours to their intensive material training sessions. In this regard, our Novolazivsky district was also included among those districts where decisions were announced.
So that's what it's about, receiving certain, probably financial assistance.
Including, for example, In the event that the specific claim was fully covered by insurance, then this situation may be legally interpreted and categorized as a case of force majeure, and so on and so forth. So this needs to be examined as a separate issue. Why the local authorities are so afraid to officially declare a state of emergency, or even a basic emergency situation.
Meanwhile, there is still silence in the Kremlin itself, but that's not surprising. Putin probably hoped to just wait it out, but that wasn't the case. The dam at the Gaji reservoir also burst. So to speak, here you go, sign for it. The Kakovka boomerang. But it seems that what surprised the head of Dagestan and the mayor of Makhachkala the most was the destroyed building, since that's exactly what they came to see. But the most interesting thing is the allocation of the budget for the region. After all, 3 years ago, the head of Dagestan happily announced the news about the largest amount of funding being allocated, 12.5 billion rubles. But where did that money go? Certainly not on strengthening and modernizing the city.
Nothing was done at all. Accordingly, if anything was done, it was only on paper, which means, once again, the money ended up in the officials' pockets, and in reality, the region turned out to be completely unprepared for the critical situation that developed. In other words, absolutely nothing. Neither the storm drains were repaired, nor was the dam reinforced. In other words, nothing was done at all. Well,
alright, so what if some residents' houses were destroyed? But apparently critical infrastructure, that's a whole different matter. Or maybe not. Even at the substations that supply almost half of Makhachkala, it seems no measures were taken either. Even if they had at least surrounded them with sandbags, that would have been something.
Everything in today's Russia is done in a half-assed way. Let's not name it. Everyone knows what I mean. Through the ass. Because the authorities are only concerned with the war, and all the money goes to the war. Plus, they're a bit preoccupied with restricting the spread of information and shutting down the internet. Those are the two main concerns that keep the authorities going. As for the people, once again, let me say, for the people, Putin doesn't care in the slightest.
Putin either just woke up or was pretending to be asleep this whole time. The master of the Kremlin has finally turned his attention to Dagestan, and he's taking it very seriously. He received reports over the phone about the situation in the region.
Well, why now? That's actually clear. Because for the second time now, both the people and their enemies have been hit, and at this point he had to at least say something somewhere. And as they say, if this really does lead to the resignation of the head of Dagestan, then it's some kind of warming up of public opinion, showing that Putin is here, Putin is vigilant, he's supposedly in charge. If you thought he was hiding under a log in a bunker, that's not the case.
And the issue here isn't about nature taking revenge for waging war against Ukraine, but rather that the system itself is incapable of handling even the most basic tasks. Where there should be oversight and responsibility, there is corruption and indifference.
When the authorities are completely independent from the people, they have no interest in responding in a timely manner, because the authorities believe that nothing depends on these very people at all. And it is only when a problem becomes critically important from a PR perspective that they are finally forced to at least somehow attempt to address the situation properly.
Give a response to it. In a somewhat half-hearted manner, this is how Putin responded.
As a result, any downpour or flood once again turns into a catastrophe that could have been avoided. But time after time, the authorities do nothing about it because essentially they don't care. At this very moment, Belarus is preparing for an active offensive. A new war is about to begin, the fire has been ignited, Russian drones are flying through Lukashenko. The Batka is hiding everything. Moscow has set a bad example for Minsk and it seems may end up paying the price for it itself. A familiar scenario is already on the table. In the end, in whose direction is the Belarusian dictator planning to make the first shot? But will he even shoot? In doing so, he might just shoot himself in the foot. More on this in just a moment. Putin's regime is preparing a new staging ground for strikes against Ukraine, this time from the territory of Belarus.
There can't be any peaceful time, Pavel. We are preparing for war.
Moscow plans to deploy bases for long-range drones in Belarus. This move could drastically reduce the response time of Ukrainian air defense and shift the balance of threats.
Belarus has never been as ready for war as it is today. In all 31 years of Lukashenko's rule, he has never invested so much in the development of the military sphere in Belarus.
And the numbers speak for themselves. Just in the past week, Rifia has launched about 400 long-range drones and dozens of missiles at Ukraine. The main strike targeted civilian infrastructure. There are dead and dozens wounded.
Putin is not able to support. Putin's occupying army is not able to support any further offensive actions. This does not exist. And there is no potential for further actions in Putin's army. And Putin, along with his command, has completely shifted to striking peaceful cities in Ukraine.
And this is only part of a broader strategy. After the massive attack on March 24th, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, confirmed that Muscovy is preparing for a new phase of escalation.
We have clear information that Russia is planning further deployment of long-range drone control ground stations, both in the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine and 4 stations on the territory of Belarus. We will respond accordingly.
If previously Belarus was used as a convenient corridor for war, now the masks are off. Minsk is becoming increasingly involved in the conflict, turning from a transit territory into a full-fledged Russian staging ground for strikes against Ukraine. In 2022, troops already entered from here, missiles were launched, and the offensive on Kiev began. And obviously the mustachioed dictator is now ready to openly put Belarus directly in harm's way. For Ukraine, these are new risks, and the key factor here is distance. The shortest distance from Kiev to the Russian border is 200 to 250 kilometers. This is time that works in favor of Ukrainian air defense. But if launch positions appear in Belarus, the distance will shrink to about 100 kilometers. And that means less time for detection, less time to react, and a much higher risk of air defense being breached. And in such a configuration, not only Ukraine comes under threat, the risks are rapidly approaching NATO's borders.
Russia is a broken civil society that is simply geared only for war, and only through war can Russia and its leadership successfully function as a society. Of course, we can talk about the war, but naturally all the experts are of the same opinion. It will be completely and utterly incapable, as well as entirely unable, to launch or sustain any kind of major, large-scale military conflict against the combined and unified military forces of the European nations.
The only thing Putin is capable of today is destabilization. But even that is already becoming difficult for him. At the same time, against the backdrop of failures at the front, the Kremlin is betting on what it does best: intimidation. And Belarus, in this strategy, becomes a key instrument, a platform from which pressure can be increased and the threat zone expanded. That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hutsakalo. Even more scorching news in our next broadcast. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. See you